Welcome, everyone. Ready to dive in? Today, we're going deep into the story of the RMS Titanic.
But not just the nuts and bolts. We're looking at the human side of it all.
Yeah, the emotions, the personal stories. We've got these excerpts from a proposed podcast script titled Tragic Tales from the Titanic.
Really fascinating stuff.
It is. And, it's incredible how, even over a century later, the Titanic still captures our imagination.
Absolutely.
One thing that really struck me was, did you know that the Titanic only had enough lifeboats for about half the people on board?
Yeah, it's a detail that, it kind of jumps out at you, doesn't it? You'd think that would be a top priority.
Right. Why was that?
It's easy to look back and judge, but we have to remember this was 1912.
Things were different then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Safety regulations just weren't as strict as they are now. Plus, there was this prevailing belief that the Titanic was practically unsinkable.
The unsinkable Titanic, right. A marvel of engineering.
Exactly. And there's even a theory that the designers may have prioritized aesthetics over safety, keeping the decks clear, for that grand visual appeal.
So they might have sacrificed some safety features to make the ship look more impressive?
Possibly. Potentially fewer lifeboats, all to maintain that sleek look.
Wow. It's kind of sobering, isn't it? That even our most ambitious creations can have such critical flaws.
It is. Makes you think about the balance between progress and risk.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to the night of the disaster. April 14th, 1912, 11:40 p.m.
When the unsinkable ship met its match.
Yeah. The Titanic strikes an iceberg, rips through the hull, damaging those watertight compartments.
I thought those compartments were supposed to keep the ship afloat, even if some were damaged.
They were designed to isolate flooding, but the damage from the iceberg, well, it was just too extensive.
I see. So even with the best technology of the time.
Even then, nature had the upper hand. The Titanic was ultimately no match for the sheer power of that iceberg.
It's almost poetic in a way. This symbol of human ingenuity brought down by something as simple as an iceberg.
It really highlights those unpredictable forces we sometimes face.
Now imagine the chaos after that impact. Over 2,200 people on board.
And only enough lifeboats for around half.
The women and children first protocol was in place, right?
It was. But even then, many lifeboats were launched partially filled.
I can't imagine. To be in that situation, families being torn apart, the agonizing decisions, the sheer weight of life or death hanging in the balance.
It's difficult to even comprehend, isn't it? And our script really gets into those individual stories, like the story of Masabumi Hosono.
Masabumi Hosono.
He was the only Japanese passenger on board the Titanic.
Oh, wow.
And he survived, managed to get on a lifeboat, but when he returned to Japan, he faced incredible backlash. People criticized him for surviving.
Criticized for surviving?
It seems unbelievable now, doesn't it? But back then, Japanese society placed such a huge emphasis on honor, on self-sacrifice. To survive when others perished was seen as cowardly.
Wow. Even if he had no control over the situation.
It highlights how differently survival can be viewed through different cultural lenses.
It really makes you think about the pressure he must have felt to conform to those societal expectations, even after such a traumatic experience.
Absolutely. A heavy burden to carry. But while Hosono's story shows a darker side of societal pressures, there is another group whose actions during the sinking became symbolic of courage and dignity.
Who's that?
The ship's bands. They continued to play music as the ship sank, offering a sense of comfort amidst all the chaos.
It's such an iconic image, isn't it? The band playing on as the ship goes down.
A testament to their selflessness, their dedication to their duty, even in the face of certain death.
It's incredible.
And there's this debate about what song they played last. Some say it was Nearer My God to Thee.
I think I've heard that too.
It adds another layer to the story, doesn't it? A sort of spiritual significance.
It must have been incredibly moving for those who heard it.
Absolutely. It speaks to the power of art to provide solace and meaning, even in the darkest of times.
Speaking of finding meaning, we can't forget about the conspiracy theories surrounding the Titanic. It's like such a huge, tragic event is almost bound to attract speculation.
Oh, absolutely.
What are some of the most common theories out there?
Well, there's the ship swap theory, the idea that the ship that sank wasn't actually the Titanic, but its sister ship, the Olympic.
The Olympic? Why would they do that?
The theory is that it was all an elaborate insurance scam.
Wow. Okay, what else?
Then there's the theory about J.P. Morgan, the financier. He was supposed to be on the Titanic, but he canceled at the last minute.
Right, I think I've heard about that.
Some people believe he knew something was wrong and intentionally avoided sailing.
Those are wild theories. Why do you think these conspiracy theories are so compelling to people?
It's partly that human need to find meaning in tragedy, I think. When something
Hmm.
so catastrophic, so seemingly random happens, it's natural to look for explanations beyond just chance or fate.
To make sense of the senseless.
Right. And the scale of the Titanic, combined with its historical significance, well, it makes it ripe for those alternative narratives to take root.
Fascinating how a single event can generate so many different interpretations and theories. It shows how deeply the Titanic has resonated with people, even after all these years.
Absolutely. It touches on so many universal themes: human ambition, the fragility of life, the allure of luxury and technology, the struggle for survival, even the power of stories themselves.
It's a reflection of ourselves, isn't it? Our hopes, fears, the enduring questions we grapple with.
I think so.
Before we go any further, though, I think we need to zoom in a bit. We've talked about the cultural implications for Mr. Hosono and the band's story. But what about everyone else on board? What kinds of choices were people forced to make? How did they react in those moments of sheer terror?
It's tough to really grasp the weight of those decisions unless you really dive into the details.
It's hard to imagine yourself in that position.
Exactly. Like, take the women and children first protocol. It wasn't always so straightforward.
Right. There must have been so many, gray
Imagine
areas.
being a man told to board a lifeboat with your daughter, but leaving your wife behind.
Oh, yeah.
Or a mother having to choose which child to put in a lifeboat, knowing there might not be room for all of them.
It breaks your heart to think about it.
And those choices, those moments of intense human drama, that's what makes the Titanic story so powerful.
It's not just about a ship sinking.
No, it's about the people on board. Their hopes, their fears, their love, their loss. It's about humanity.
I keep coming back to that image of the band playing as the ship went down.
It's incredibly powerful.
It is. And the song, Nearer, My God to Thee, the script mentions some accounts say they played a different song.
Right, there's some debate about that.
But that particular hymn, it seems to have stuck in everyone's mind,
I think it just adds that extra layer.
of spiritual significance.
Exactly. It speaks to that human need for comfort, for solace, especially when facing death.
And that melody, it's haunting, beautiful.
Absolutely.
To think about the power of music to transcend even those horrific circumstances.
And I think it speaks to the bigger role of art, of storytelling, in shaping how we remember things,
Yeah.
how we understand history.
The Titanic has inspired so many books, films, even music and paintings.
Each one offers a new perspective on the tragedy,
It's like the Titanic has become this cultural touchstone,
a symbol that goes beyond the event itself.
a lens through which we look at love, loss, social class, even the limits of technology.
Precisely.
You mentioned different interpretations. I'm curious about how our view of the Titanic has changed over time. What was the immediate reaction back then?
Well, at first it was mainly shock, the sheer scale of the tragedy.
Of course.
A lot of finger-pointing, trying to find someone to blame.
Right.
The inquiries focused on technical failures, safety regulations, decisions made by the crew.
So it was more about the practical causes and who was at fault.
Exactly. But as time went on, more personal stories came to light.
And the narrative shifted.
It did. The focus moved away from the technical details towards the human element, the stories of courage, sacrifice, survival.
Almost like we needed time to process the enormity of it all before we could really delve into those individual experiences.
I think that's right.
It reminds us that history isn't just facts and figures.
It's about people.
Their stories, the emotions that connect us, even across time.
And that shift in perspective, focusing on the human side, I think that's what allows us to really connect with the Titanic.
To empathize with those who were there.
To understand their choices, their losses.
And in doing so, we gain a much deeper understanding of history
One that goes beyond the headlines.
that speaks to the complexities of what it means to be human.
Exactly. The Titanic isn't just a shipwreck. It's a mirror reflecting our own humanity.
It forces us to think about our own mortality
How we'd react in such extreme situations.
and to remember just how fragile life really is.
It's a powerful reminder that no matter how advanced we become, nature, fate, those things can still have the upper hand.
We talked a bit about those conspiracy theories earlier. Some find them intriguing, others dismiss them entirely. What do you think draws people to these alternative explanations, especially for something like the Titanic?
I think it goes back to that need we have to make sense of the world, to find order in chaos.
When something is tragic and seemingly random, as the Titanic happens,
We want to believe there's a reason, Some hidden explanation beyond just bad luck.
We're trying to impose order on a chaotic event, find meaning in what seems meaningless.
And often these theories tap into our distrust of authority, that feeling that we're not getting the full story.
It's interesting how these theories can stick around, even without much evidence.
They fulfill a need, to believe in something more than the official story.
And that's part of what makes the Titanic so fascinating. It sparks debate, discussion, exploration, even after all these years.
It's a story that keeps on giving. The Titanic, in a way, has become a symbol of our fascination with history, with tragedy, and with those big questions about human nature that we're all still grappling with.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on the Titanic's lasting legacy. What impact did this have on, maritime safety, and how do we remember the Titanic today?
The Titanic really did change things. It was a wake-up call for the whole maritime
Oh,
industry.
yeah, absolutely. It exposed those flaws in safety regulations and led to some big changes.
Changes that we still see today in how ships are designed and operated.
Yeah, for sure. So what were some of the biggest changes that came out of the tragedy?
Well, almost immediately after, there was this thing called the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea.
Catchy.
Yeah, SOLAS for short. And that treaty, it set new standards for lifeboats.
Okay, like what kind of standards?
Well, for one, ships had to carry enough lifeboats for every single person on board.
That makes sense.
Seems obvious now.
Right. But it wasn't always like that. They also made lifeboat drills mandatory.
Smart thinking. And they set up the International Ice Patrol to keep track of icebergs in the North Atlantic.
Wow, so they really took it seriously.
They did. It's amazing how one event could lead to such massive changes across an entire industry.
It shows just how big of an impact the tragedy had. What
Yeah.
about the ships themselves? Did anything change in how they were built?
Oh yeah, definitely. The Titanic also pushed for improvements in ship design. Things like double hulls became standard.
Double hull?
Basically, having two layers of the hull, the outer shell of the ship, for extra protection. And they improved those watertight compartments too, making them even more effective.
So they learned from those weaknesses.
They did. And communication got a boost too. Radio for distress signals became much more widespread.
It makes you wonder if those changes, had they been around before, could have saved lives.
It's hard not to think about that, but at least, those lessons learned from the Titanic have helped to make the seas safer for everyone.
That's something. So the Titanic's legacy, it's a bit complicated, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say so. On one hand, it's a stark reminder of the risks that come with pushing boundaries, with human ambition, and how important safety really is.
And on the other hand,
It shows how humans can adapt, innovate, and most importantly, learn from even the most terrible events.
we talked a lot about the technical side. But we also see the Titanic remembered in so many other ways.
Absolutely. Museums, memorials, all kinds of documentaries and artistic interpretations.
Books, movies, the whole thing.
Mhm.
It's a story that still resonates with people, even today, on a really deep level.
That's the power of it, right? It's become this symbol of resilience, of how fragile life is, and it shows the power of stories, how they can last through time.
There's a reason why we're still talking about it after all these years. The passengers, the crew, their stories are still so captivating.
It's about their bravery, their sacrifices, their hopes. Those stories still inspire and remind us about the strength of the human spirit.
I think the Titanic has almost become a myth in a way.
It's a cautionary tale, sure,
Yeah.
but it's also the source of endless fascination.
Even with all our progress, it shows that we're still vulnerable to the whims of nature, to fate. It's a humbling story.
It makes you appreciate life and those connections we have with each other so much more.
It's been an amazing dive into the human side of the Titanic tragedy. Looking back on it all, what stands out to you the most?
For me, it's those individual stories. Even in the middle of all that chaos and tragedy, there was so much courage, compassion, selflessness, hearing what those people went through, their choices, their losses, their little victories. It just reminds you that even when things are at their worst, the human spirit has this incredible ability to shine through.
History isn't just about the big events, the dates and names. It's about those individual journeys, too.
Yeah, those glimpses into people's lives, that's what makes history feel real, relatable. It reminds us that we're all connected, and even in the darkest times, there's always hope, strength, and that enduring power of the human spirit.
Well said. I hope everyone listening has a new appreciation for the Titanic, more than just the sinking ship, but all the human stories that came out of it and the impact it still has today.
And maybe it sparks some curiosity, Go out and find some survivor accounts, listen to the music that was played on board, learn about all the changes that came about because of the tragedy. The Titanic might be over a century old, but it's got so many lessons and insights for us, even now.
Absolutely. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into all those amazing stories that shape our world.